All right, welcome back. For those of you that have been listeners to the podcast, I appreciate it. We're Tuesday today. This podcast is going up Thursday. We have a potentially stormy Tuesday, so hopefully my internet here in Princeton doesn't get hit by a storm. But we have Seth Anderson from Waseca today. Coach, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to be here. Glad to be on your long list of great coaches on the podcast so far.
Yeah, this is the from the New Prague staff from about 5 years ago. Now this is our second coach we've had with Tesdal now having you jump on.
Yeah. I was he your first one you ever had on the show?
He was the second one, but he was like the first real interview. Like I was just talking with John Carrier for my first one. So if anyone listens to that and listens to the other one, it sounds a lot different. We were just talking hoops. I go, hey, I'm going to hit record and post this as a podcast. And that's kind of where it started. But he was the first real interview, but he was the second episode.
Yeah. It seems like a long time ago now. When I got out of college, I took my first coaching job in Blue Earth area. So I was down there for 3 years coaching and teaching down there and, kind of looking to go somewhere else. And, you always hear good things academically and sports-wise about New Prague. So I took a job in New Prague thinking, I might be done with coaching for a while, try something different. And once you know it, Bryce Tesdal took the head job at New Prague. And we had kind of known each other a little bit just because we were the same age. We were both in the state tournament our senior years in high school, played in the high school all-star game together. So we had a few connections here and there of knowing each other. But when he got to New Prague, he was looking to build a staff and said, hey, Seth, would you want to come coach basketball with me? And, at the time I was kind of like, this is going to be a great way to meet people. And really, I mean, when you're a young coach, really you don't have a whole lot of other people that you've seen do things differently. When I think to my coaching background, my dad was my high school coach, played at Gustavus for Mark Hansen. And those are the only two styles that I've ever seen be executed. So, when I went down to Blue Earth as a head coach for the first time, I knew what I knew. And, being an assistant for Tesdal, he did things very differently than what I've ever seen before. So it was really a fun year to be able to be an assistant for him at New Prague, where number one, we had some good players and a good team that year. But also to be able to see a guy who shared that same passion for basketball and how he went about his business of coaching, especially at a 4A school. Coming from the small school background where AA basketball was pretty much my background and knowledge, and being able to see him do his thing at New Prague and, be able to steal some things from him that I liked and now be able to bring some of that stuff back to me with Waseca. It's almost kind of a blend of things that I've liked from all of the coaches that I've been around historically or things that I've seen people do. So, that 1 year in New Prague, being with him and teaching up there kind of brought my love of basketball and passion back, and being able to go back. And we actually lived together in New Prague that year. So, the basketball talk never really ever seemed to end once we left the gym back in those days.
How did your perspective change as a coach? And you kind of mentioned it before, but as a young coach, usually, you're an assistant coach for a couple of years and maybe you get your head job and you kind of stay in that head cycle. But you were able to go head coach and then to assistant, then back to head coach. So how did you evolve from that first round as a head coach at Blue Earth to where you are now as a Waseca head coach?
I think my knowledge base just grew so much more, having seen a lot of, when you go to that 4A level, everything is a little bit more in depth. You got these guys who are completely all in with basketball. And, when you're coaching at a AA school, or a single A school, all your kids are 3-sport athletes. They have to be 3-sport athletes or else you don't have the programs be able to perform. So, when you go up to, schools like New Prague, it kind of opened my eyes up to, these 1-sport athletes that, put in 11, 12 months a year of all basketball. That was probably the biggest eye opener to me. Was how much these kids put into the sport. I remember being up there, and I got up there in the summertime, and we did summer basketball, and it was almost like a job for those kids. I remember some of those kids would get up in the morning, they would lift weights, come to morning practice. Some of them, if they were like freshmen, there was like a basketball camp for them. And then in the evening, we'd have like scrimmages during the week. So it was almost like an 8-hour job of basketball during the summertime for a lot of those kids. And then some of them worked on top of it. So it kind of opened up my eyes of what high school kids could do at that level. And then, you get done with summer basketball, it moves into fall basketball. You got your winter season, which is the biggest one. And then all of them play AAU basketball during that time in the spring. So it was quite interesting to be able to see it from that side. And then kind of all the different offenses and defenses that schools at that level would run. From my background before I got to New Prague, playing at Maple River and playing at Gustavus, I was never ever allowed to be in a ball screen. Like if I had the ball, it was a rule in our offenses that you couldn't ball screen. So getting to the New Prague level, Tesdal's main offense was a ball screen offense. So that was kind of my first introduction of really diving into the intricacies of the ball screen offense. And, the more and the more I saw him run that ball screen, the more I liked it, more I appreciated it, the more things I saw that you could do out of it and be effective with it. And it was really interesting because, going from, especially at Gustavus, it was illegal to ball screen. So, I mean, everybody at Gustavus, if you ever play a pickup game with anybody who went through the Mark Hansen School of Basketball, nobody ever ball screens in a pickup game there. So it was very strange for me to buy into that type of system. And now that I'm at Waseca, where we've had some really good guards, we ball screen all the time. So it was funny how, my styles and ideas of how to play basketball and coach basketball didn't completely change, but how I was able to come over to that side of the realm a little bit more and appreciate it and be able to put it in with the type of players that we had. So that's probably what I appreciated the most, was just seeing different things and how people went about managing, how they went about through a practice, how they prepared, how they scouted, all of those things like that, that I had not been on the other side of, and see somebody else do it at that level.
So we obviously have a mutual friend in Coach Eric Jacobs, who is essentially a family member to me now at this point, with his dating my sister-in-law, who used to be the girls coach in Princeton and then was the assistant girls coach in Mankato West, and was a dear friend of yours going back to your Gustavus days. So I've been well aware of the Gustavus style, and we've obviously had our dozen or so conversations about basketball over the years of us knowing each other. And I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of already you're beating me right now down my question list, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth because I know Gustavus is such a heavy off ball, 3-out-2 in motion, off ball screens, high low type stuff with the bigs. And so how did you go a little bit more into detail how you evolved as a coach from that traditional 3-out-2 in, high low off ball screen motion to, and you mentioned the players you have with the Willingham brothers and the other guards that you have, but how have you evolved as a coach then installing ball screens within your system?
It's so funny where, when you're a player at the college level, or even when you're a player in high school, you feel like, heck, I could teach anybody to play what we do. And when I was at Maple River playing for my dad, it wasn't called this back then, but I would have said it would have been more of a read and react type offense. We had some good posts, so we played a little 3-out-2 in back then. But when I got to college, yeah, like you said, it was just all purely motion basketball at Gustavus. So, you kind of learn how to come off screens, how to come off a down screen, how to run a fade screen, how to set your defender up to come off screens. Dribbling was really frowned upon playing at Gustavus. Anybody who took more than, dribbling was almost illegal in our offense. Our coach Mark Hansen would always say, the best dribble that you can take is to improve your position to make a post feed. That was kind of his mentality of, dribbles are kind of wasting your time unless you're going to the hoop or in improving your position. So, playing as a guard in a 3-out-2 in kind of motion offense, you kind of have to figure out, well, how can I be effective? My game and my style was more of a, penetrate in the middle of the lane and pull up and shoot a mid-range jumper. That was kind of my style of play, where that's a hard thing to do in a motion post-oriented offense. So it took me a long time to figure out how to be effective offensively as an offensive threat versus just kind of catching and keeping the ball moving in that type of perspective. And when I got to coaching at Blue Earth, We had decent big guys at Blue Earth. We played pretty much 3 out, 2 in the entire time I was a coach there, just because of our size and, not having a lot of great ball handlers at that time to be able to do anything else. So I pretty much took what we did at Gustavus and put it into work at Blue Earth area. And that's kind of where my coaching background started. Was I knew how to coach this well, and we kind of had a personnel that kind of fit that at Blue Earth. And that's kind of where I started. My coaching was, we're going to be a 3 out, 2 in post-oriented offensive team. I knew how to coach it well. I played in that type of style for a long time. So, that's kind of where I started. Now, when I went up to New Prague and we had more of a balanced team where you had 5 guys, 6, 7, 8 guys that could all score the ball if you needed them to. And I saw Tesdal put in the ball screen offense, which, it didn't completely take away post play. I would say anytime we got a post touch at New Prague, Tesdal is really happy about it, which is usually kind of surprising. Like you hear the ball screen, you don't really think of, post touches very often. But he kind of had a system that he liked getting post touches out of his ball screen offense. And, you could, and the thing I liked about it is you had the opportunity to make it guard oriented if you wanted to, or you could make it post oriented if you wanted to, out of his style. And, they had guards that could make plays off the dribble, get to the hoop and score at the rim, or come off ball screens and knock down threes. Or, we had good post players where, you could run it around and move the ball and get post touches out of it. And I thought, this is really good. I mean, this is a type of offense that you could put in if you have good guards or good big guys. Because at the high school level, I mean, it's a crapshoot for what you're going to get sometimes. You don't know if you're going to have good bigs or good guards. The only downfall is if you don't have, those dominant ball handlers that can create a play, which is why a lot of teams run that read and react offense sometimes, because it cuts down on the dribbling. So, when I took the head job down in Waseca, you kind of have all those backgrounds of, what do I want to do? Do I want to run the read and react? Do we have guys that can pass and move the ball, but maybe not be able to penetrate? I mean, do we run a dribble drive offense where we're trying to attack the hoop every time? Do we play 3 out, 2 in and just keep pounding it in? There's so many different styles of basketball that you can play, and there's really no right or wrong answer, because at all levels you've seen all the different styles of offense be successful to a certain extent. So it's almost trying to figure out what your kids' strengths are, and trying to fit that into an offensive system that's going to benefit them to the best of their abilities. And that's kind of where we settled on when I first got down here in Waseca, is kind of a continuity ball screen offense where, we wanted to feed the post. But at the same time, we had guards that could make plays off the dribble, and we wanted them to be able to have some freedom too. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is, kind of playing a continuity ball screen offense where the perimeter guys have the ability to make plays, but we still have good big guys, and we like our post touches too.
You have a unique situation in that you played for your dad at Maple River, and then now he currently, after a long and successful career on his own right, then now he's an assistant on your staff. So talk about just how unique that situation is. I know there's a lot of players who play for their dad, right? And then get into coaching, right? A lot of us, my dad didn't coach at the high school level, but he coached a lot of our youth teams and traveling teams and AAU type stuff. And so talk about playing for your dad, but also the unique opportunity to have him on your staff.
Yeah, when you're playing for your dad, there's so many different dynamics in play. And, at the high school, when I was in high school playing for him, we had a really good boundary lines of, when we're at home, he's my dad. When we're at the gym and I'm on the basketball team, he's Coach Anderson. And I called him Coach Anderson, when we were in that type of scenario. So, we had a really good balance of, player and father relationship. And looking back at it, I don't think I completely understood it back then, but I appreciate it more now, is that he was harder on me than he was on everybody else. If I messed up, he was going to chew my butt. If somebody else messed up, he was going to chew my butt. I think it was one of those things where, he was going to let everybody know that I wasn't getting any favoritism at the high school level. So looking back, I appreciate that now more than ever before. But, like you said, being able to play for him, and, he went into the high school coaches Hall of Fame last year. So obviously, I mean, he's a well-respected coach, especially in Southern Minnesota and other places as well. So, it was kind of one of those things where I was at Waseca and he was at Mankato West as the head coach at the time. And, he was starting to, that generation of coaches, the whole huddle thing, that's hard for them. The technology part of the game that has come into play now with films and scouting and the whole huddle thing or crossover or whatever you use, that's hard for him to keep up with things like that. And it was starting to wear him out and burn him out and make coaching not quite as fun anymore. And I told him, you're getting down to the end here. And, we got some good Waseca teams coming up. And, it would really be fun for you while you're still wanting to be a part of coaching to be able to come over and coach with me at Waseca. And, we kind of talked about it. And a week later, he goes, Seth, were you serious when you thought like I could come over and be your assistant? I said, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So, after that, it was kind of a done deal. And he's been my JV coach ever since. And he's loved basketball more as a JV coach than being a head coach probably the last 5 years, just because, the scouting part of it isn't so intense. You're not at home watching film every night. If you get beat, you don't lose any sleep over it as a JV coach. And I know that you can probably speak to this as well, but when you're an assistant coach, you can be the fun-loving guy who just goes to practice and all the kids love you. You're not that authoritative figure having to lay down the punishments or be the enforcer when it comes down to it. And he has just absolutely loved that part of being an assistant coach after having been the main guy and having to set things up for so many years. So he's absolutely loved it. And, the funny thing is we joke about this a lot. My coaching staff right now is my dad as the JV coach. He's 62 years old. He's retired from teaching. I mean, he basically just subs and coaches basketball now and works out at the golf course once in a while. So he's 62. I've got my volunteer assistant is a 61-year-old farmer who, I mean, he could retire at any point that he wanted to. And our ninth grade coach is a guy named Ted Hammond, who used to coach at Janesville, Waldorf, Pemberton. He's a retired head basketball coach and teacher. He's 72. So the three coaches I have on my staff right now are all at that age of retirement where, they're just chomping at the bit to get to practice and be able to ride the bus to games. I don't know how many times where we've had an away basketball game and I get done with school, I scurry over to the high school to jump on the bus, and we're about to take off for our 2-hour trip to Marshall, Minnesota. And I get on the bus, and a lot of times as a head coach, you finally like, all right, everything's organized. I'm going to relax on the way over.
Yep.
Well, those guys, they've just been sitting at home watching TV shows all day long, or, so as soon as they get on the bus, they think it's just happy hour. They think it's social hour. They just want to, tell stories and, hey, what'd you see on TV today? Did you see the game last night? It got over at 1 a.m. And I'm just sitting there like, geez, guys, like I was in bed at 10 o'clock last night. And, it's just one of those really hilarious dynamics of, being on the go all day long and being able to coach with these retired guys that come in, and just to see the pure love that they still have for being around basketball programs. That's really kind of a fun thing for me. And, how many assistants are out there that have been in coaching for as long as the assistants that I have right now, where, they've been there, they've done that, they've been in the state tournaments. And they've been through, those really tricky situations that you have in coaching once in a while. And, just having those guys to bounce out ideas off of and, be able to talk things through with, that's been a great perk that I've had the last few years here at Waseca. But, there was one of those things, you and I kind of talk about this a lot, a couple of years ago with us both being in the state tournament at the same time. And, it's one of those things where, being able to be a player for my dad in a state tournament for 3 state tournaments, and now being able to coach with him by my side as we made a state tournament and play in the championship game, those are some really special memories that we've been able to make so far. And I always tell people, I probably don't even appreciate them as much now as I will in 10 to 15 years. But what a cool opportunity to be able to play for your dad and then be able to coach with your dad and be able to have a success at that level. It's a really, really a neat thing. And, probably I don't even think you and I have talked about this, but one of the things I appreciated about you the most a couple years ago was, you and I were both in similar situations where, heck, we're in Class 3A basketball. We're preparing for our first ever state tournament. Just the emotions and the adrenaline that go through you throughout that whole time as you prepare for, 3 or 4 days of just absolute madness and craziness getting ready for that time period. But, and then you and I ended up playing 2 of the same teams in the state tournament that year. So, to be able to talk with you and, talk a basketball with you and, to be able to go through that, I don't know if any other people realize it, but to be able to go through that with basically you together, that's a cool bond that, you and I will have for a long, long time in our coaching careers. And, it was just one of those things that if you're not a part of it, it's hard to understand what all goes into it. And, you talk about players and teams, and man, we were scouting the same exact teams and we played the same exact teams like within 2 or 3 days of each other. So, that's a cool dynamic that you and I have been able to share the last couple of years here.
And we probably watched the same film. I remember what was cool about the state tournament, my wife and I talk about this a lot, was I'm sure you guys experienced it as well as at Waseca, was just like the community support. And we'll talk about that with your program here in a little bit. But then also just from from our family perspective, like my wife was pregnant with our now almost 1-year-old at the time we went 2 seasons ago, or last season, however you want to look at it. And our then 2-year-old, who's now 3, was like, first time she's ever been to the city. She loved looking out the window and walking on the skyway, and just like some of that stuff, like being able to experience it with your family. I mean, obviously what you enjoy playing with working with your kids, like you coach a 16-week season and you have these goals in mind, and to see your kids reach those goals is extremely satisfying. But then to include your family and experience with your family is just a really awesome experience. And for you, even more so with your dad being on the staff. I mean, one of the things that I love so much about my job is obviously I have great kids, but I am really close with all of my assistant coaches. And so Dylan, who's my assistant coach, was in my wedding, and Jordan, who used to be our JV coach, he was in my wedding. And just like the relationship I've had with my assistants, from Nick Novak, who's our local business owner, who's our JV coach, and Aaron, 9th grade coach, and was first year in the staff, jumped right in. And having those connections where, it is funny because I've been in that same situation where we're all coming from different spots. I'm at the middle school. Aaron, I guess our 9th grade coach, is a 6th grade teacher, but that's about a half a mile away on the other side of the building. Our JV coach is a business owner, and our assistants at the high school. And we're all just like, you're like, oh, I just want to sit. We don't have the 2-hour bus rides as much within our league, but even for 45 minutes, you're like, I just want to sit and scroll my phone and get caught up on what's going on. But then you get on the bus and you got 3 or 4 people that you enjoy spending time with and enjoy coaching with, that it kind of reinvigorates you. You start having conversations about whatever is going on in the world. And it's really cool. And I think one of the most important things with coaches, and people talk about it like having good assistant coaches from the perspective of X's and O's. And you're obviously lucky enough to have that with some former head coaches. But you got to have assistant coaches that you can be you don't got to be best friends with where you're drinking at the bar every night with them. But you got to be able to have buddies or coaches who you are friends with and can close with, or it turns into a really long season.
Oh man, in the coaching world is a big time fraternity. I mean, it really is. You think about how many people are in the same situation that you are coaching, and the winter season. I mean, until you coach the winter season, especially basketball, you don't realize how long and how much of a grind the season is. I mean, it's an absolute grind. You wake up and it's dark outside, and you go to work, you get done with practice, and you come home and it's dark. I mean, it's like you don't even know if there's sunlight outside during those winter months. But, like you said, I mean, you got to have people to be able to go through that with you. And the better people you have to go through that with you, that you trust and you have confidence in, and can help you even just with minimal tasks, just getting the jerseys ready for the kids as they come in, just simple things like that go a long ways in that long run of a winter season. So yeah, you really can't overlook that part of the assistant coaches and the guys who are helping out with your program, or your student managers. And like you said, basketball and high school sports, it's a community thing. It's a community thing. And, sometimes it's hard to realize it in your home gym on a Tuesday or Friday night. But when you have the ability and the opportunity to make a state tournament, and all of a sudden the whole town shuts down, and that you walk into the Target Center or Williams Arena, and the whole half of the arena is filled with your colors, the orange and black for Princeton, or the blue and gold in Waseca. And, those are some of the biggest goosebumps I've ever gotten in my lifetime, is be able to walk in and say, it's not really about me. It's not really about individuals. It's not just about our team. It's a community thing. People from the community take pride in what's going on in their schools, especially in, the bigger, higher profile programs like football or basketball or, hockey, whatever it is. Those team sports that make a state tournament run, there's something special about them because the communities feel a part of it. And, that's what makes high school sports almost untouchable compared to any other, sport like that. All the kids, all the coaches, all the families that are involved, where, there's a lot of passionate college football fans out there or NFL fans out there, but there's something about that connection that makes it feel like it's your own when you're going up there with your community team. And like you said, your families, you're so proud of those moments to be able to go up there and share those experiences with them. But there's so many other families that are sharing in with that same type of experience of going up to the cities and maybe staying in a hotel for the first time with their family and going to watch their role models play at the Target Center that they've seen. You and I grew up cheering for Kevin Garnett at the Target Center. And next thing you know, you're standing there where Flip Saunders used to, and your guys are shooting shots from where Kevin Garnett used to. And, it's just one of those things where, man, like, how fortunate are we to be able to go do some of those things and enjoy some of those things. And, the relationships, like you said, I one of my favorite things about coaching is when the kids that you've coached come back during Thanksgiving or Christmas time, or they come in to scrimmage the high school team. Those are some of my favorite moments. I always try to talk the kids into going to McDonald's with me across the street after those types of days. And, those are such fun things. We got the Strike boys or the Willingham boys or the Olson boys and the Goozies and the Nelsons. And there's so many alumni that I've had that, it's just so fun to be able to see what those guys are up to now and be able to talk to them a little bit more as adults, as opposed to that whole coach and player relationship. So, like you said, I mean, the relationships and, the excitement level that being able to play in those big situations brings to you, I mean, it compares to nothing.
So you mentioned the community piece, and I want to build off that a little bit. I remember when you guys, I think it was after you beat Austin in the state semifinals 2 years ago, and I heard a quote, or maybe it was after the state championship game that you guys lost in just by a couple points to De La Salle, is you had a really cool quote about like something along the lines, and I'm paraphrasing, this is like Waseca's team. It wasn't like my team or our, it was like Waseca's team or something along those lines. And it just shows like, how invested you are in the community and understanding that it is, it's not about you. It's not even about, the players on your team. It's about everyone who, wears the blue and gold, like you mentioned. So what are some ways that you have, obviously Waseca as a big basketball tradition, what are some ways that you kind of continue that community bond and growing that community's enjoyment and connection to the basketball program?
One of the coolest things is, and I don't think players realize how much the community loves coming to high school events. When you're playing, you don't see all those people in the stands quite as much. They're there and they're loud, but you don't really see those individual faces all the time. And I try to explain to the kids all the time, like, people in the community know who you guys are. Especially when you have some success and you win some big games, people know who you are. I mean, they read the community newspaper, they read the Mankato Free Press, they come to games, they see the programs, they hear your names thrown around all the time, and a lot of high school kids, they're not always ready for that big type of responsibility and to be in the spotlight like they are, and, it's one of those things that we spend a lot of the time during the season trying to explain to them, like, you guys are representatives of Waseca. You guys are a part of the community. The community is what makes this basketball part of it so fantastic, so fun to be a part of. And that's one of the things where, you try to introduce the players to as many fans as you can. And, you try to do things in the community to, just for good public relations type things. But, it's one of those things that I don't always think the guys on the high school level, some of them do. I don't think they always understand how big of a part of the community that they are. And, being a fourth grade teacher, I teach elementary kids that, they know exactly what happened in the basketball games that night. They could care less. Those elementary kids could care less that I'm coaching the basketball team. They want to know what it's like to be around, the Willingham brothers or Andrew Morgan or Ryan Dufault. They want to know what it's like to be around those guys, and they just talk about them like they talk about those guys like you would of Joe Mauer or, of Karl Anthony Towns. They talk about them the same way. Like they see those guys as almost the same type of guys as those NBA guys. And when you teach elementary school, like you see it and you get it. Or if you're a parent of one of those young kids, like you see it and you get it and you understand like how big of an impact that those guys have on the younger generation. I mean, just as an example, there was a kid when we went to the state tournament a couple years ago. Kid goes, "Hey, Mr. Anderson, I'm not going to be in school on Wednesday. Our family's going to go up to the state basketball game. Do you think you're going to go to the game?" Like it was completely over his head. The kid asked me if I was going to. Yeah, I just told him like, yeah, I'll be up there. They don't even know that I'm coaching the basketball team sometimes. And like, I don't know how many times that they've heard somebody mention something about me as Coach Anderson in the building. And, it still just goes over their heads. Like they're so interested in the players that are on the team. They don't care who's coaching it. That's just Mr. Anderson. I see him every day as the fourth grade teacher, So it's really funny to be around that type age of students and kids all the time. Like how big of a deal those high school kids are to them. And, I try to relay that message to our high school kids as often as possible, but I don't always know if they even completely understand it until they get to your and I's type age, when you start having younger kids that look up to them like these young kids do now.
My eighth graders are a little bit different. They grasp that I coach the eighth graders that I have in my social studies class. But what they want to know is like, hey, how many dunks you guys have last night? How many dunks did Cody Miller have last night? He had 2 dunks. Like, oh, can you show me the highlights? Like, no, we're not going to watch the highlights in class. Like, we have work to do. But they came to the game if you want to know what the dunks were like. But you kind of hit on my next point. If you mention, the Morgan kids getting a lot of Division I interest. You had Malik Willingham is at Mankato State right now, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And the other one, his brother, I saw, just had a football and basketball offer for Mankato, and Dufault's probably a scholarship level kid as well. And so talk about how you, with having such high level players in your program, how do you challenge them in practice when you are in a smaller community? And I talked with Coach Berg at Lake City about the same thing as well. And so what are some ways that you challenge them in practice when, it's not like a Hopkins or it's not like a Eden Prairie, when your JV team could probably beat a lot of varsity teams? And so how do you keep them motivated and challenge them in practice?
Yeah. And, when you've got some really high-end talent, like Andrew Morgan at 6'9", he'll be playing Division I basketball at some point. There's nobody that can match up with him. Honestly, I mean, unless we bring, like a Jake Guzzi who's playing at Gustavus right now. But, I mean, he's about the only body that could ever match up with him in a practice. That we could throw at him. But, Kyrese Willingham being 6'5" and lanky, like there's not a lot of guys on our team that can match up with that. And, that's why they are sought after as scholarship players, because, there's not a lot of high school players that can match up with them. And that's what makes your team good to begin with, is that you have those guys. But, one of the things that we talk about is, playing physical in practice. We play way more physical in practice than we do during games. And, I always kind of give our second unit or our JV team, I always let those guys pound the crap out of our varsity guys. That's kind of how it evens the playing field, and, not necessarily, throwing elbows or, coming down with hard fouls and stuff like that. But, I kind of give them the okay to, kind of pull on some jerseys and, kind of push them off of spots the best that you can. We kind of loosen up the rules a little bit for those guys to kind of give them advantage and be able to push those guys a little bit. And, there's been a lot of times in practices where, things are easy for our top 5 to be able to score against our second 5 or our third 5, and one of the things that always seems to liven the mood up is, I'm still young enough to be able to jump into practice once in a while and try to hold the fort down with our JV team. So I'll jump into practice and try to beat those guys up and hold the fort down on the scout team once in a while. And as soon as the coach jumps into a practice and starts playing, everybody, hey, I got coach. I'm going to rough him up. Everybody wants to show that they can guard coach and that they can score on coach. And, I can still hold my own well. I don't know how many more years left I have of being able to pull that off, of being able to, elevate the energy in practice that way. But, you just got to try to find goals in practice. There's a lot of times where, we'll put 3 minutes on the clock and say, all right, JV team is up 5 points with 3 minutes to go. All right. And we play from there. And, the varsity guys got to be engaged because they have to get stops. They got to be efficient with their possessions and got to score. You try to put them in disadvantaged situations to be able to keep it competitive and to keep them engaged. And, we try to do a lot of one-on-one things. We try to play one-on-one. One of our things with our defensive and offensive things in practice is, being able to stop the guy with the ball in front of you and being able to create skills where you can score on a guy one-on-one in front of you. So, we try to, those individual skills, we try to keep as competitive as possible and pair some of those higher level players with higher level players so that they can continue to push each other. And, it's one of those things that, at every level of basketball, especially at the high school level and the smaller school you go to, the harder it is to push those top guys to be able to get better and better, especially in a 5-on-5 scenario. Luckily for us, we've been able to be deep enough the last few years where, we might not be able to compete with our top 5, but we can be competitive enough where if they don't do things well, we can abuse that. But, it's one of those things where, you want those top guys to play with each other. But, once in a while, there's a lot of practices a couple years ago where I would take Malik Willingham, who's, like you said, playing at MSU, and I'd put him on the scout team, and our next top 5 would play against our scout team with Malik Willingham. And it was amazing how intense it would get because Malik would want to take that team and show that, hey, I can beat these guys with anybody, and it was almost like that Michael Jordan mentality of, hey, you can stack it against me as much as you want. I'm still going to be able to win this thing, however you set it up. So, we try to set up different things like that to keep it competitive throughout the year and interesting.
Offensive X's and O's wise, one thing I want to come back to, but I wanted to fit with the conversation about your better players. So you have a 6'9" Division I kid, and who's a good back to the back post type player. And as you mentioned, the game has evolved from where a lot of teams are running off ball motion. I know Coach Klingspor and Tartan talked about this as well, and I had him on a couple weeks ago. But how do you, even within your ball screen offense, what are some ways that you're able to get some traditional post-ups and run your offense through the post? Yeah,
and you know what? The more basketball has gone, you've seen the importance of the three-point shot. Just absolutely explode these last 5 years, the Steph Curry effect. And, at the college level, at the pro level, it's even more amplified. But, the guys who have really good big guys, those are still the teams that are making it to the state tournament. And those are still the teams that are really hard to defend and seem to be the most dominant still. Until I think you see a shot clock come into high school basketball, I think you're still going to see the importance of the post touch and post moves and post play. And that's one of the things in our ball screen offense. We start with, dribble handoffs and, kind of some three-man, I don't want to call it triangle offensive side, but we kind of refer to it as the 3-man side where, you kind of have 2 perimeter players and a post player on one side of the floor and, it kind of spaced on the other side of the floor with 2 guys. But, we always tell our kids anytime a post player is open, they got to get the ball. They got to get the ball. No matter what type of, style you play, you want to get the highest percentage of shot as possible. And, I'm still kind of into that belief is, a layup or a shot close to the basket is still the best thing that you can possibly get. And be the most consistent with. You don't want to be that team that, shoots 40% from 3-point line all year and all of a sudden in a playoff game you shoot 21% and all of a sudden you're out of the playoffs. That's much more likely to happen than it would be if you were to get a whole bunch of post touches. And I would say most of our post touches, they probably score 60% of the time or better on a post touch, which, I mean, if you can get a 60% shot, you're probably going to take that every time. So that's one of the things where, our offense is built for post touches, probably first. But it also has the ability for those guys, like I said, to make plays off the ball screen. Like Ryan Dufault, the kid we have right now, is unbelievably good at being able to get in the lane and create off the ball screen. So, our number one, excuse me, our number one mentality is to get a post touch every time down the floor. Whether it happens or not, or whether the defense dictates for that to happen or not, might be the second part of it. But we always kind of talk about in our offense, the way the defense defends us will determine who gets the ball. If they defend us this way and they double team the ball off a ball screen, well, here's the guys that you could possibly throw it to. If they defend it this way, Andrew Morgan better get a post touch every single time. If they're fronting him, we better try to get a high-low, and if it's there, we should throw it every single time. Things like that, just kind of be able to go through the progressions. And, it's almost like a football mentality. If they're going to take away the deep pass, we better throw that short pass and let them run for a ways. Or, if they're going to put 7 defensive backs out there, we better run a dive up the middle. It's that type of mentality where, you want kids to believe in, that we have 5 guys on the floor that can be effective if it's their turn to be called upon. And that's kind of the mentality that you want to try to play with. When it comes down to the last 3 minutes of the game, yeah, we want our best guys touching the ball and getting shots. But, up until that point, we still want the highest percent of shot as possible. And if that means people are double teaming the post and not letting us get in there, well, yeah, we'll shoot a wide open 3-pointer if that's what it comes to. But our first mentality is usually to get post touches if we can.
All right. So last segment or last question here. This is one thing that you want to talk about too in our pre-texting beforehand. What are some things that you've learned as a head coach, or what advice would you give to a new or a first-year head coach?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing is in coaching, you want to figure out, what's important to you and what do you believe in. And, you got to, once you figure out what you believe in and what you want to do whatever you can to carry out those things. Because, when I was in Blue Earth, we had a really good football coach down there named Randy Kuchenmeister. And he would always say, do it the way you think it should be done. Because at the end of the day, you have to answer to you. You have to answer to you. You're not answering to anybody else. You don't want to go through regret of saying, I wish I would have done it this way. Coach the basketball or coach the way that you think it should be done, and that's going to be different for every single person. But you want to be able to figure out what style can you coach the best and carry it out. And, I always tell, people who are getting into coaching for the first time, there's going to be things that happen during a season that you can't predict is going to happen. Whether a kid does something stupid, gets in trouble, a fan or a parent does something stupid. I always try to tell coaches something stupid is going to happen during the year. Something that you wish wouldn't happen. And when it's in the process of happening, you're like, how are we ever going to recover from this? How are we going to get through this? And, one of the things that I've learned throughout the 8 years that I've been a coach and 6 or 7 as a head coach, no matter the situations you come across, it's eventually going to fix itself. It's going to work itself out. You might have to, go through the discipline process, whatever that may be, but you will get through it. You will get through it. Something will happen and you'll go, my gosh, how are we going to move on from this? 2 weeks later, you don't even remember that thing happened anymore. And, as a young coach, you're so worried and you get so caught up on the things that go wrong that it's hard to see like, oh, it'll be okay. Like if I carry out the discipline, if I carry this out, or, if I have this conversation, it might not be great right away, but in the long run, it's going to be all right. And, things will progress and things will get better. And everybody who's been a head coach will tell you there will be parent problems at some point. There will be player controversy at some point, playing time issues, whatever it may be, getting in trouble in school, whatever it may be, there's going to be something that comes up where you go, man, it's going to be really hard to come back from this one. And you always find a way. You always find a way. There's always that phrase of this too shall pass. Especially when you're coaching in a long, long basketball season, stupid things are going to happen. And, you just got to figure out how you want to respond to it and how you want to react to it and where to go from there. And almost 99% of the time, those things will fix themselves. And, the other thing that always interests me is, the whole strategy of basketball. There's no exactly one correct answer or blatantly wrong answer when it comes to strategy. Like I was, when I was sitting down with you, like I said, let's talk about some situations, like if you have a 3-point lead late in the game, do you foul? Do you try to guard the 3-point line? Tie game with 20 seconds left and the other team's holding for the last shot. Like, do you sit back and let them run that last play, or do you try to attack them, or do you pull the old Jimmy Valvano and foul and put them at the free throw line so that you can get the ball back and try to win? Like there's so many different strategies and styles out there, like the kid picks up 2 fouls in the first half. Do you sit them? Do you let them play? There's no exact right answer to any of these things. And, whatever you do, there's always going to be people that second guess you when the game is done. And I think that's one of the things that I've gotten better at as the years have gone on, is not second guessing the decisions that I made at the time. You're the coach, your team, the team that you're playing. You have the best knowledge and information of everything that's going on at that time. Will your decision always work? No, absolutely not. You might have made the right decision and it still didn't work, And those are the things that you got to be able to take in mind, as you might have made the right call and it still didn't work. Or you might have made the wrong call and it worked. It's just one of those things where there's no exact correct answer, and you've got to be able to kind of live with that once in a while. And the last thing that I always try to tell people is try not to connect your mental health to wins and losses. And everybody who's in coaching is guilty of this. And I know I've gotten better at it, but I'm still really awful at it. And I know Coach C, you struggle with this too from time to time, is, my happiness shouldn't be connected with how well teenage boys play basketball. You get beat on a Friday night and you spend the whole weekend just upset about how poorly you played that night, and when you look at it in the big picture, it's just so irrational to think like that, because Johnny missed a 3-pointer that could have won the game for us. I'm feeling bad all weekend, why is that the mentality that I go in there with it? And, I'm never going to be able to completely fix being upset after a loss, or, being as excited after a win. But, I always try to tell myself I can't connect my mental stability or my happiness or sadness to how a bunch of teenage boys perform on a Friday night, and that's the mentality that is you try to think about, but it's really hard to execute that, even though how irrational it seems to you at the time. So, that's the best advice that I can give coaches, is do the things that you think are the best for your program, make decisions and stick by them, even if they work or they don't work, and adjust from there. And at the end of the day, make sure that you have good people around you for the ups and downs of the season, because there will certainly be ups and downs.
Coach, that's really good stuff. I appreciate you taking your time out of your week here to come and talk with us. I've been doing great things at Waseca, and I expect, although you guys didn't get the opportunity to try to get back to the state tournament this past year, unfortunately, which we could have talked about, but I didn't want to kill your vibe today. I expect to see you guys back next season doing big things. So thanks for joining us today.
Coach C, it's always a pleasure, my man. Hopefully we'll run into you sometime soon.
Sounds good.